This week we're going to continue this, what I'm calling the survey of the Old Testament, of the Spirit in the Old Testament. Really, what I'm looking at is the word ruach, which in the Old Testament, as we talked about last week, is the word that's used 99.9% of the time in the Hebrew for spirit. So when we see spirit in the Old Testament, it's the word ruach. Ruach, though, however, can be translated, sometimes it's breath, wind, mostly spirit. And then spirit will be, I think we talked about this some last week. Spirit can mean God's spirit, which is a predominant way. It can mean our spirit or heart or disposition. Uh, I have a troubled spirit, for example. Or it can mean another spirit. And if you'll notice on the handout, I put a section with another spirit and I put question mark. And we won't get into this too much today, but there is a whole discussion when you, especially if you look back to Jewish thought on whether that means uh, an actual supernatural spirit or whether it's more of kind of a description of what's going on with us. Like God allowing our spirit is caught up in jealousy was one example last week, and God allows us that to be since that's what we're have given ourselves over to. So anyway, with that, we're going to be focusing on God's spirit, but we're going to be touch base on those others because I think for me, it's a little interesting just to see how it's used. So a little bit of a nerd thing, but also I think when we see it used in other places, it may give us a little bit of a hint of how God is using spirit in terms of describing His spirit. And so I'm one of the things I'm going to be doing as we go along that today, I'm still experimenting with the best way to do this survey because Ruach is used like 400 times, or almost 400 times. We're not obviously touching on all of them, but I'm picking a section. We're going to do a section each week. Last week we did the Pentateuch. This week we're looking at the books of history, which is Joshua through Esther. Next week we'll do the books of poetry. And so we're going to grab a section at a time, go through, and I'm going to summarize off a list of scriptures, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion. Some of it will be just filling in the blanks on our handout, and some uh, you may see things that I haven't seen or want to expand on some of those. Uh, from last week, well, one of the other thing I wanted to mention that I don't think I mentioned last week. One of the reasons I'm excited about doing the survey, even though it's a little bit challenging and in a way it could be tedious to go through, is I don't know about you, but when I thought about the Spirit in the Old Testament, I had maybe a half a dozen passages that I could think of, and that's if I had a lot of time to think about it. You know, the Spirit hovered over, the Spirit came on Gideon, David, you know, those kind of passages. The Holy Spirit, David references in Psalm 51. Kind of had those somewhere in the brain floating around. But farther than that, I really couldn't have told you. If you showed me a passage, I might remember, you know, I'd remember it or might remember it. And so one of the things I'm hoping as we go through these is it will spur your mind like it has mine, where you may see a passage that, oh, I forgot that was there, or I didn't really connect that to what was happening here in this story. You know, here's the Spirit right in the middle of it, God references. Um, And that may hopefully, maybe that'll lead to questions or comments in the class, but it also, I'm hoping as we go through the year, maybe you or you may want to encourage someone to talk more about that particular passage that we don't have time to do necessarily going through a survey like this. So last week we talked about Pentateuch, and to give you an example, at the end of class, one of the passages that just really hit me, talked about at the end of the class, Genesis 1, 2. And this is on your handout. When the Spirit hovers over the waters, what are two possible purposes based on how hover is used in Deuteronomy 2? Anybody remember or want to throw out a, if not, I'll jump right in here. What I'm going for there, quickly over this. Carrie?
This is not regarding your question, but did you say that there was a handout that had spaces empty to fill out?
Yeah,
Because I never got that. What date was that sent out?
Friday with a,
Was this Friday?
yeah.
Yeah, with the order of worship. Yeah, it was on there.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't find it. Okay, that's okay.
We'll get
I'll
it to you
get it
later. I'm
another
going to cover,
time.
I'll cover it all, but thanks for, I don't know if something's not working. But on the handout, basically there's two blanks. And last week we talked about hover and the spirit hovering over the waters. And I found a rabbi who kind of put me onto this, and then I chased it, and it's pretty well-known thought. I just never heard of it. He emphasized the word hover instead of spirit there to understand what the spirit was doing. And the word for hover is only used twice in the Old Testament in the Hebrew. And the other word is used in Deuteronomy 32, and it's describing an eagle fluttering over its chicks or whatever you call its babies, and nurturing them, taking care of them. And I won't read the whole passage now, but it's emphasizing protection and nurturing. And so when I looked at hover in the past, this is maybe not how your brain works, but I tended to think of it as kind of almost like a impersonal thing. I mean, what do you think of as hovering? Well, drone hovers, Gerald's helicopters, kind of a detached thing. The spirit's over creation hovering. Maybe detached is too strong a word. Didn't really give it a whole lot of thought. When I start thinking about the spirit is looking over creation, protecting, uh, it's brood. The word, it literally means brood. And it all of a sudden takes that word that I never really gave a thought about or thought of as fairly impersonal, and it makes it personal. And I think that's what the Hebrew means. I don't think that's a stretch. And I think I'm pretty positive, and especially with the research I've done, that's the way Jews view that word. So when they read the Spirit hovered over creation, it meant something pretty powerful, means something pretty powerful. So just going through this little survey has completely changed my reading of that passage, and I hope hopefully we'll run into some others that you may notice if I don't in the same way. Uh, I have a question we won't discuss today, just one of those things, random things that came up yesterday. Does it ever say the spirit stopped hovering? Well, I mean, I think we know the answer. It doesn't. Makes you wonder what that would mean. Moving along. Okay, I've already taken too much time. Uh, just a general statement. This is another blank. We also noticed last week that when the Spirit of God shows up in Scripture, and I'm talking about the Old Testament right now, I think it's true new, it tends to be to empower individual groups to do something. There's an action involved, usually. Not every, you don't see it in every passage, but really often. And we'll see some of that today. And so this week we're going to jump to the books of history, Joshua through Esther. And it just so happens that in Esther and Ruth, the word ruach doesn't appear. Now, I mean, I think we'd all agree with those books. You can see the spirit moving, but you don't in what's happening, but you don't see that word. And so we're going to go through these, and again, uh, uh, we'll be looking at three main areas of the way spirit's described or used with the context: God's spirit, our spirit or man's spirit, and then potentially other spirits. And so I'm going to run through uh, the first half of our passages. And on the handout, I didn't list every passage that's in the books of history, but there's about 50, just so you know. So I'll go through. In Joshua, it's used a couple times. Both are with the same context, and both, I'll just read it to you. And it's referring to one example is when Rahab's telling how they reacted, how they have reacted since they've heard of God's miracles and his interventions for Israel. And And she says, and as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in anyone because of you, meaning the Israelites. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. They had heard all the powerful things God had done, and it had taken away their spirits. It had melted their hearts. And that's one use of Ruach. And this is another example we had from last week where there's this little couplet where it puts heart right next to spirit. Our hearts melted and there was no spirit left in us. And so that happens pretty often when it's referring to our spirit. Then in Judges, it's used about 8 times. And just note some of the ways it used to describe how the Spirit came upon. I'm just going to read a few of these. The Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him, referring to Samson when he was young. Several times it says, then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, meaning Samson. So not just one time does it refer about the Spirit coming upon Samson, but it also rushed upon him several times. In the first passage, it goes on to say, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces, as one tears a young goat. In another passage we'll look at later in the lesson if we have time, that's in Judges, God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. This is in chapter 9. And then I'll be summarizing these more and more as we go along just the same time, so you can have time to comment. Or either we'll finish real early. In Samuel, it picks up. There's about first and second Samuel. Well, first Samuel, there's 14 times. Second Samuel's 3. Now, for you, anyone that's a literalist, if I'm off one count, give me some grace. Okay. Spirit of God, that's supposed to be fun. Spirit of God will rushed upon is used several times, mostly, and it's mostly referring to Saul and Samuel. And then, but it also happens with David. And then the one we're pretty familiar with, the Spirit departed from Saul. And a harmful spirit from God tormented him, meaning Saul. And both of those are Ruach. The spirit, meaning God's spirit, departed from him. And then a harmful spirit from God tormented him, is Ruach too. And then we get to Hannah. This is actually in the beginning, 1 Samuel. Hannah was troubled in spirit. That's Ruach. And then when Elijah went to the desert and the angel God ministered to him and he ate, his spirit was revived. And this Ruach is used several times in reference to Elijah's spirit. And then in 2 Samuel, there's a passage I want to talk about toward the end that's a prayer or psalm of David. And it ends, it's talking about God will come on the wings of the wind. And that word for wind is Ruach. Kind of an interesting passage. There's another one that refers to the Lord's breath, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils, referring to the Lord's. And I wish we had time to get into the context of all these, we just don't. But if you have one that just really stands out to you and you remember that passage or have something that you want to bring up, please do. And then the Spirit of the Lord speaks by me is another word. So now we're going to go back to the handout. For those that have the handout, imagine in your mind, Carrie. What are some of the ways? This is under the section called Ruach, referring to the Spirit of the Lord or God. What are some of the descriptions of how God comes on a person? Gary, excuse me, Gary?
Yeah, I would like to point out not exactly what you were asking, but I don't remember any time where it says the Spirit gently used or the Spirit gently resided, or there's always this sense of power. That was my comment. Thank you.
Oh, that's an interesting. Have you noticed now that two people who have spoken have both not talked about my question? Is it the cold or is it my question? Okay. Anyone else? But that's a really good point, Gary. Lawrence, did you have your hand up or were you just praising her?
Yeah, in the tradition of the morning, I'm not going to talk about your question either. But I did notice this morning as I was reading through Numbers that at one point, at least in the translation I used, part of God's Spirit that had been on Moses was removed from him and spread among 70 elders of Israel. And so in that sense, it's authority, or I found that interesting at least. I probably, until this theme came along, I probably just ignored that and plowed right on through Numbers, but it stuck out this morning.
That's a good one. I wanted to spend more time on that. Always trying to figure out where to spend the time. That is a really interesting one. And the idea of gentleness.
I apologize for hijacking your thought.
No, that's what I want. I'm actually making notes for potential use in a Wednesday, so where we have a little more time to focus on. So any ideas like that, I love it. And then the gentle thing, you reminded me of a passage we'll be coming to. Let me sort through. I told Gary one day, talking about getting off the subject, I told Gary one thing. It amazes me, his brain, and many of you have the same kind of brain. It's like you're on the latest iOS system and somebody asks a question and you go, oh yeah, over in Genesis 3:6 and Judges 2:5, and that's that story over there. And I feel like my brain is more like I'm still working on thumbing through files, hard files, and somebody moves the boxes around every once in a while. And anyway, but there was something you reminded me of, Gary, and I'll think of it. Anyway.
That's what it's like to be married to him, too.
Well, thankfully I'm not, but okay, what are some ways? Does anybody have any, or I can answer these real quick. If you just
Clothed?
clothed, thank you. Thank you, Twyla. We got one. Let me give you the gold star. What does that mean to you when it says clothed? The Spirit clothed Gideon.
Well, I mean, the thing that I think of is that he just completely came over him, and I don't know. To me, there's that the power of it, the protection of it, it's hard for me to put it in words, actually, obviously.
No, I think that's a pretty good description. You know, where that word is used, that's a really well-known passage, is in the garden. When God covers Adam and Eve with skins after they've sinned. It's the same word, which is kind of the same idea, I think, when you're talking about Twilight. It's also when, in a more common type thing, when Saul gives David his armor to fight Goliath, and he puts his armor on him, it's the same word that's used in there, clothed him. So it can be a very simple thing, but it also can mean a very powerful meaning too. What's another one? Thank you. Tell you what. Oh, Gary.
I think it's a very similar idea, and I don't know what the word is, but often we see where the Spirit came upon.
Yes.
I believe David is described as a Spirit coming upon David, and Saul for that matter, earlier in First Samuel. But that seems to have the idea of kind of overwhelming, to where there was an obvious difference before and after.
Absolutely. Yeah. I see I made a mistake on my outline. I meant to say it right, comes upon a person, and I think I looked at upon because of what Gary's talking about. And there's some little, comes upon is probably the most frequent description in the passages we're looking at today, especially the ones I just looked at or reviewed. In Judges, it talks about one I had never caught, rushed upon. I just never really paid attention to that, just read right over it. And to me, it's really interesting. It rushes upon Samson. And we think of the Spirit as coming upon someone. I didn't realize how many times it references like to Samson, several times. It says the Spirit rushed upon him in different situations. And so when you're reading Samson, you read this, you do get this very image of power, because it's always, or those examples are always right before, like when he's ready to tear apart the lion, or he's ready to go kill Philistines. It says the Spirit rushes upon him, and then the next thing he does is goes out and, takes care of business. And then, so that sounds like a very immediate type thing, and that's when you're using the word rushed. But then it says in Samuel, the Spirit rushed upon David, and I don't have it right in front of me, from then on, something to the effect of from then on. So you get that kind of more permanent thing. Karen, did you have your hand up?
Well, it made me think about Pentecost, a mighty rushing wind. I wonder.
Ooh, that's a good one. That is an excellent one. And someday, when we have time, this is another distraction, but it's very on point, I think. I have found more information teachings from Jewish scholars who talk about Exodus 2, Mount Sinai, and the connection to Acts 2. Now, these are Messianic Jews, obviously. If I didn't say that, who see that connection, because Jews see Exodus really in a different, Mount Sinai in probably a different way that we tend to see it. We talk about the law, and the law leads to death. They see this connection that's very powerful and a lot of similarities. And this rushing on that happened at Exodus, they see a very similar type setting described in I said Exodus, in Acts. They see it very similar to Exodus. So rushed, we got that. And then did anybody notice that the Spirit began to stir Samson? This is when he's young. That was an interesting description that I hadn't heard. Doesn't say came upon. Now the NIV is kind of different, because it says, it just says came upon. Matter of fact, in the closed verse, the NIV says came upon, which I think kind of misses it because they're different words. Anybody guess what stir means? Or what's that think to you? Anybody annoyed yet with that sound? Rats. Could you hear the tapping? I didn't know if that'd come across or not. Oh, that's too bad. For the last 30 seconds, I've been tapping my pen real loud. Stir means literally to tap. Most of the time, it's translated as somebody who's troubled or annoyed. Isn't that an interesting word to describe? It said the spirit began to stir Samson, and I have no idea the lesson here. I'm looking at the time. I have no idea the lesson here, but Carol and I were talking this morning, and I just thought it's worth mentioning. The Spirit began to, he was a young man and he grew, and the Spirit began to stir him. The very next verse, he goes down to the Philistines to find a woman. I don't know what that means, but it's just kind of
That's interesting because
crazy irony to me.
yeah, as a lifetime cook, the first thing I thought of was stirring bad
Oh, okay,
or
stir the
something
pot.
like that. And I thought, well, it stirred him to be aware of the need to do these things for God. But no, tap, tap, tap. He was trying to get his attention, it sounds like.
That's what I thought. Trying to get his attention. I
Yeah.
just is it when yeah, if you use that translation anyway. I hate to always go to these far out, you go to a translation and you'd never see that in the word unless you read Hebrew. But sometimes it does give you a little, insight, especially if that word is used a lot, in scripture. Or if it's like the word about hover, words specifically. Okay, I've gone through those. Let's see what's next here. This is
Before you
another
go
lesson.
on,
Oh, go ahead.
the stirring and the annoying or tapping or bothering, it makes me think of a pebble in my shoe, you know. So if the spirit comes on you and just keeps bothering you, which made me think of the song "Oh Love That Will Not Let Me Go."
That's great. In all seriousness, till I noticed the next verse thing, which you can throw that out. I'm sure that's not what it was for. About the fact that he went down to Philistines at that point. But I think that's a great illustration because I think we all have those times that we felt like the Spirit just keeps coming back. This thing keeps coming back at us, coming back. Finally, we open our eyes and go, oh, okay. I think I'm starting to get it, and sometimes it's a baseball bat rather than a subtle tap. Just to move along, this is another discussion that we don't have time for, but we've all read the Spirit departed from Saul, Spirit came on David. But if you keep reading Samuel, while it doesn't say it this way, the Spirit came upon Saul again later on, while he was chasing one of the episodes where he's chasing David. And so that's what's kind of different is to think about the Spirit departing and the Spirit coming back. Although you can see in Samson's life, how off track he was, and then the Spirit would intervene again and pause to doing things. I heard one person put the Spirit's work in us is not dependent on how good we are. I mean, he's working. Now, obviously, we want to be in a position that we are in tune with the Lord, but God's going to accomplish his purpose is basically what the author is saying. And then the next question on the outline is what are these? Some of these are going to be you may get from other passages. These are just some I pulled from what we've been looking at. What do these books reveal about some of the purposes for the Spirit for them coming upon someone? And I'm going to cover a couple, and then we're going to do a little more review so we have time to finish. The one that comes up a lot is to prophesy. With Saul, in the story of Saul, it's very frequent. And Saul prophesied, his messengers prophesied. Another thing is the Spirit came on to speak. It enabled somebody to speak. God was speaking through a person. There's a few more I'm going to throw out, but I want to quickly do the review of the next set of passages. Kings and Chronicle and Ezra and Nehemiah. Naturally, Kings and Chronicle are going to be similar since some of them are going to be repeats since they are telling a lot of the same stories from different perspectives. In Kings, Ruach shows up 8 times in First Kings, 4 times in Second Kings. Just a few of the places. This is Obadiah speaking of the Spirit possibly carrying away Elijah And he says, and as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. And there's another passages that says essentially the same thing. It says, I don't know where the Spirit's carried him, whether to the mountains or whatever. That's kind of an interesting thought about the Spirit carrying someone. I thought about, I mean, we know that passage where the God takes Elijah up, but I never thought this is before that. It's just, anyways, just kind of an interesting thought. Here's one that could take a lot of discussion another day. Then a spirit came forward. This is a prophet called Micaiah, I think is how you say his name. He's saying, then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord. Now, this is a vision he's having, saying, I will entice him, speaking about King Ahab. Now, there's a whole long story there that's just a really neat story. Ahab wants his prophets basically to tell him that he's going to have victory in this battle. And this prophet Micaiah goes to the Lord, or has a vision, and he says, talks about the Spirit coming forward and going before the Lord and saying, I will tell Ahab, I will entice him. And Lord asks the Spirit, by what means? And the Spirit says, I will go out and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And this goes on and talk about this lying spirit several times. And these are all ruach, the word ruach. And then in Chronicles, the whole story is told again about the Spirit coming to the Lord and offering to entice Ahab. And it's one of those, if you want to use fun Bible stories, because it's just Ahab, he wants to be told that he's going to be victorious. And so finally he believes this lying spirit and he goes out there, but he's a little bit unsure. So he disguises himself in the battle. And sure enough, everybody goes after Jehoshaphat and the king of Judah, and Ahab is the king of Israel. They see it's not Ahab and they leave him alone. And so the battle stops or they back up. I don't remember exactly. And it describes one soldier as accidentally shooting off a spear, an arrow. And where does it land? On Ahab, and it kills him. And so it's just kind of a strange little story thrown out there. But in the middle of it's all this thing about this vision of a spirit going before God and enticing, much like Job, the start of Job. It's hard to rush through these passages. Then let's see here. I'm going to jump down to Chronicles. There's numerous times in Chronicles where it talks about spirit coming upon someone more, with the clothed Amasai and clothed Zechariah. He stirred up the spirit. Now this is our individual spirit. Pul, the king of Assyria, he stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia. And then we get down to Ezra. Ezra has just a couple times, and one is a repeat of what I've just mentioned, but the other time he talks about then the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites rose up. It was everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go up to rebuild the houses of the Lord. And so God had stirred up all these different individual spirits. And so technically where it says spirits is referring to their spirits, but it's interesting because you can very strongly, it just very strongly looks like the spirit stirred up their spirit to go build the house. And that's the same that he had done with Cyrus to stir up his spirit to support this effort. In Nehemiah, just a couple simple ones. You gave your good spirit to instruct them, referring to the Lord's Spirit. And then you warned them by your spirit through your prophets is another one. And then going back to the outline, there's so many more verses there, but so you got just in these short values, you've got passages, you've got to carry the Spirit came upon someone to carry them, or it did carry them, to build the temple, to instruct, to warn. I mean, there's all these different things that you can see. Let me see, we got 2 minutes left. So I'll run through this last part, just to give you a flavor of how Ruach's used or how is used in other ways. Referring to our spirit, Hannah's spirit is troubled. Elijah's spirit was revived. And the one I mentioned about the Lord stirred up the spirit of Ezra not of Ezra, in Ezra and Nehemiah, the spirit of Cyrus, as well as people. And then other spirits, we've already talked about these, the one where it talks about enticing the prophets. These are the blanks you have. The Lord sent a lying spirit or deceiving spirit. And then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. That's actually the word Ra, which, if you've seen any science fiction movies, a lot of times they'll use the word Ra for the god Ra. But it means morally, what you would think, morally evil, bad. A harmful spirit from the Lord, the one that you read about there numerous times, that's the same word as evil spirit. Gary and I were talking one day a long time ago, and at least earlier this year, last year, about this passage, and I know you've got some thoughts about that, so maybe you might want to say something short, or we can save it for Wednesday night. But basically, I'm just want to open it up for a few minutes. Considering everything, what are some takeaways from these passages about the Spirit, about how the Spirit works in individuals? Where it maybe gives you hope, maybe just learn a little more.
Really speaks to me of power and strength. And if he's indwelling us, we have a lot more ability with him indwelling to do things that seem overwhelming to us as humans. If we don't remember that we have that weapon, that asset of attack or defense in our lives as Christian warriors.
Makes me think that the spirit is a Swiss Army knife. Sounds like the spirit can do just about anything that's needed, which is a good thought too.
Well, it makes me think about you watch movies that have genies in them and it says be careful what you wish for, like meaning you can't outrun destiny. What's going to happen is going to happen. And there's that element with God too. It seems like he'll come to you and tap or come on you or whatever, and you can get on board and it will go as well with you as it possibly can. But even if you don't, you're not messing up God's plan. He's still going to get what he wants, even if you disguise yourself or whatever. Good luck.
To
I
kind
like
of
that
follow,
application. Excuse me. I like that application of when you first said that, right before you ended, I'm thinking of kind of the standard packet. We fall away. Tying in Ahab disguising himself is great. I think that's his will will be done. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody.
I was just going to follow on with that comment that Jen just made. God's going to do what he thinks should be done, whether we participate or not. We're given a choice. We're given a chance to participate when he calls us, when he stirs us, when all these words, when he decides that we're ready to do what it is that he wants us to do. And the point of, I think the important point is God determines how his spirit will be distributed, how it will be used, what it will be used for, what kind of power element is involved. Sometimes it's very gentle, or sometimes it's very violent almost. So I think in modern day Christianity, when we think of the Spirit, we're always thinking of this Lamb that resides within us. Kind of gentle, quiet, not forceful at all. That may not be God's choice for me or for you. So God determines, not us.
Very true. Well put. Absolutely great. Let me see the time here. We're 2 minutes out, so I'm gonna close because I have a passage I want to read. This may be a little stretch, but as I was going through all this, I just kind of came in love with this passage again. So in 2 Samuel 22, David is praising God again, and he goes forth with this psalm or song that I think probably later became Psalm 18, or it's the same as Psalm 18, however you want to say it. I've cut out part of this, but I want you to, it ends with this image. He soared, God came down, he soared on the wings of the wind, and the wind is Ruach. And again, it says wind, the scholars say wind. Going through all this, I can just envision this, tying this, his spirit coming, or he's on, however that works, I don't know. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold, my refuge, and my Savior. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. I've heard that somewhere. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. I cried out to the Lord, and from his temple he heard my voice. And my cry for help reached his ears. Then the earth shook and it quaked, and the foundations of the heavens were trembled. He parted the heavens, and he came down with dark clouds beneath his feet. He mounted a cherub and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. Isn't that just a cool passage? I love it, especially since we've been talking about the Spirit so much, which we know God and the Spirit and the Son are one. Thank you for all the great comments. Next week, we'll be talking about the books of poetry. And you gave me a lot of great ideas for future stuff. So thank you. Or maybe you want to do future stuff on these. So go for it. Thank you all.